You are now watching Believe. Do you believe?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tracy Sandler Show, brought to you by FIVO. I am your host, Tracy Sandler, and I am so excited on this first week of 49ers training camp to be joined by NFL Insider Jordan Schultz to talk all things 49ers. Jordan, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tracy. Great to be here.
So let's jump right in with the topic. I was going to say the topic of the hour, but it's basically been the topic of every hour since March 26, 2021. Trey Lance will be starting as QB1. I understand Jimmy Garoppolo is still on the roster. That's not going to be the case week one. I'm sure because I said that it will be, but I really do not believe it's going to be the case week one. Let's talk a little bit about that. I've seen Trey obviously throw in practice in the offseason programs. What are you hearing about the 49ers' new, hopefully, franchise quarterback?
San Francisco is really, really excited about Trey Lance. I think because he didn't play a lot in North Dakota State and he didn't play in the SEC, the small sample size of what we as fans and reporters have seen, it's tough to gauge. But what I've heard, the two biggest things that I've heard that I think are really exciting if you're a Niners fan about Trey Lance. One is he's a really hard worker, and you listen, you can hear that, but with Trey, I can tell you that everyone you talk to says this guy is an absolute monster in terms of the film room, his body, what he's eating, the way that he prepares. And I think last year, despite the fact that I'm sure he wanted to play, was really good for him to sit and learn for the majority of the season. So that's exciting. And then two is just the arm strength. I think he's got just a tremendous arm. He's athletic. He's super smart. And, obviously you have this Debo situation looming over the team. But as a whole, if you think about Debo and Ayuk, the fact that they've been able to, surround him with a really good offensive line, I'm really excited about Trey Lance. There will be a learning curve, but without question, the work ethic and just the natural talent, the leadership, he has the full package and all the tools you need to become a successful quarterback.
We really saw in the offseason program when he would come and talk to the media. I mean, he was like a different person. And he admitted, he said last year, I was a rookie. I was the backup quarterback. That put me in a bit of an awkward position when he did talk to the media, and he didn't talk to us very often. But you could see it really in day one of the offseason program. He walked in there, he walked to the podium, and it just felt like, this guy is the starting quarterback for a football team. And so I know that games are not won in press conferences, and games are not necessarily won with work ethic. Well, I take that back. They're not won in press conferences. I do think work ethic becomes a huge thing, but I would have to agree with you. I think the team is excited. I think there will be a learning curve. The 49ers fans have to prepare themselves. There will be the game. There'll be the occasional game of 3 interceptions and a fumble and a this and a that, but he's essentially a rookie quarterback coming in to lead this team. But you brought up Debo, so let's talk Debo, and then I want to get back to a little Garoppolo trade package. But you did bring up Debo Samuel. I would assume he will report. He would be fined $50,000 a day if he didn't. That feels like a lot of money. So I imagine he will report. I'm not so sure he'll actually participate in practice. Will he be in meetings, the film room? Absolutely. Not sure he'll participate. What are you thinking is going to happen in terms of this contract extension? And are we going to see it happen sometime in these next few weeks?
I really hope so, because, at the age of 26, the season he just had, he's such a massive part of what this team wants to do. And obviously it comes down to, what does he want? How much does he want to play strictly receiver, and how much is he willing to line up? I think he was banged up last year. Without question, down the stretch, he battled through it. He deserves to be paid. I'm of the mindset you need to take care of him. Will he report to camp? If he reports and he doesn't participate, there's no fine. So there's really not a whole lot of downside to reporting and just being a part of meetings, but being, removed from a physical standpoint, which I would assume he would do. In terms of a deal getting done, I don't think they're super close, to say the least, right now. He's represented by CA Sports Story Dan, who also represents DK Metcalf, another guy whose deal is not particularly close. So a lot needs to happen. But bottom line is, I can tell you definitively, and I don't think there's any surprise, that San Francisco wants Debo in the building long term. It really comes down to, what does he want?
And I think for Debo, and I don't know if he's looking at it this way right now, and I'm just a reporter, so I don't actually play on the field, which is better for everybody. But for Debo, it feels like the best place for him to be is in Kyle Shanahan's offense. And of course, you brought up how much does he want to play running back? And I felt like in the draft this year, the 49ers, whether they would admit it or not, kind of made a little bit of a statement. They did draft Ty Davis-Price, which doesn't bode super well for Trey Sermon, which we can get to there in a little bit. They drafted Danny Gray. It felt like some of those first few picks that they had were to take a little bit of pressure off of Debo. I also would make the argument, and I have on this podcast multiple times, with a different quarterback with a different skill set, they may not need to use Debo at running back as much as they did last season. So It will be kind of interesting how that plays out.
Well, 100% with Lance, that once you have Trey, then you can incorporate a lot more of the read option stuff. I think, similar to what Philadelphia did with Hurts last year, narrowing the learning curve for Trey, which is making easy 1 and 2 reads and allowing him to run. You mentioned Danny Gray. I know they were thrilled to get him, really, really fast guy out of SMU who had a terrific season. And you mentioned Davis-Price, which is huge because that was someone that a lot of teams really liked. And as he went through the pre-draft process, I heard a lot of this guy can help from day one. This is before he went to San Francisco. His physical running style, he was really, he didn't get a ton of touches at LSU the last couple of years, but they loved him there. And I think the Niners are going to love him as well. His physical running style. Trey Sermon, obviously, I wouldn't give up on him yet, but obviously with Davis-Price there, that's another, that's more competition. Obviously Raheem goes to Miami too. So we'll see about that. But in terms of the weapons, adding Danny and Davis-Price should alleviate some of the stuff for Debo, certainly.
And I think we're going to see a pretty incredible season from Brandon Ayuk. Last year he went through a lot to start the season. And I think it's a real testament to Ayuk that he kind of overcame that and didn't let ego get in the way. But I think we're going to see now a full season of the Brandon Ayuk that everybody saw his rookie year. Yeah. And all of a sudden this wide receiving core, let's assume a Debo deal gets done, or let's assume even if it doesn't, he comes, he plays because he wants to get a huge deal somewhere next year. You have Debo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Juwan Jennings, Danny Gray. I mean, you end up with a pretty incredible receiving core, which is not something that has necessarily been a strength of his team. And I didn't even mention George Kittle because, of course, he is part of that corner. Go ahead.
Well, Jennings was huge for them down the stretch and surprised a lot of people. They got a ton of young talent at receiver. So, really, that whole offense has a lot of young talent, and I'm really excited. I've been on record that I think Trey Lance is going to exceed expectations this season. I think the offense is going to be very good. To me, they're an 11, 12-win team. There's no reason why they can't be a legit playoff team and potentially a contender, maybe in a year or two. But with in regard to the offense and those receivers, they're absolutely loaded. And, you're going to have to see Jennings take a jump. Ayuk, I think, he showcases when you watch him and he's right, you see a legit number one receiver. So in theory, you have number one guys.
And you have Ayuk and Trey Lance have spent a tremendous amount of time together this offseason working together, which will only be a benefit for them. So you mentioned Trey Sermon. We've obviously talked about Trey Lance. They're just Treys everywhere on this team. But this sophomore class of the 49ers, really, this is a huge year kind of for all of them. You have Ambry Thomas at cornerback, who we saw really come alive towards the end of the season, a guy who didn't play in 2020, sat out, the COVID year. And as the season went on and he got into better shape and got more used to the NFL style of play, he did amazing. Elijah Mitchell obviously was incredible for this team last year. Trey Lance, we've talked a lot about. Trey Sermon, maybe they don't give up on him, but we'll see what happens there. Aaron Bake. So basically that class kind of becomes interesting because the way the team stays good is to draft well and have guys on rookie contracts that are contributing and playing well for these next few years. So when you look at that 2021 draft class, does the success of this team depend on the success of that group?
A lot of it. And Thomas is probably, out of all those guys, arguably the most important because, you mentioned him playing well. I think if he can take another step forward, that would be enormous for them because, they have not had, the Niners have not necessarily had a true, number one guy. I don't know if Thomas gets there in the next couple of years, but just having him be consistent would be huge. Someone who can guard number twos, that would be really helpful, to say the least. So you mentioned, who else did you say? Well, Sermon too, where they drafted him, considering his pedigree, you expected him to do so much, and you want him to do so much. I know that he's a talented guy, and they would love, when you draft someone that high, you investing in them, and you want them to have success. You're going to have opportunities. So that's why I said, let's not give up on him just yet. But out of all those guys, probably the corner would be the most important for me.
And corner is interesting because they also signed Charvarius Ward, and they haven't really invested in corner. They paid him a lot of money, and they have not invested in corner in that way, and certainly not as long as I've been covering this team. And I think, far before that. So all of a sudden, though, that cornerback position has a lot of depth, because you do have Charvarius Ward and Emmanuel Mosley, who are your presumptive starters. But when you talk about Ambry Thomas, I feel like there's a chance they're looking at him to take over the Mosley position next year, because Mosley's going into a contract year. You have Sam Womack, who I think is going to be the surprise candidate who ends up winning the starting nickel position. But there's a lot of depth there. Of course, Jason Verrett coming back, going to try to bounce back and make this team. I mean, it's kind of incredible that they're now in a position where Jason Verrett may not make the team. That's the depth they have at corner. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying he may not. I think he will, but it's kind of a crazy place to be in, especially when you look at where they were a few years ago.
Well,
didn't mean to interrupt you.
The Ward move was huge. That was, one of the most important moves that they made, or arguably the most important, considering he was really, really good in a really tough division for the Chiefs. So for him to come in and get that kind of money and be a number one guy, that's what they're expecting, and rightfully so. So I think Jason makes the team. You mentioned Sam too. There's certainly a lot of excitement with him. I think it's easy to forget about a lot of that depth. I didn't even think about him. So that's a great point. But you need it. And the NFC West as a whole is, Seattle is like, I don't know what to expect, but not a whole lot. I think the Rams will be better, obviously bringing in Allen, and the fact that they have with Matt Stafford. And then obviously I mentioned the Niners. I think San Francisco has a chance to be extremely dangerous. And, Arizona, despite the fact that they faded last season, thought they had a great offseason. And there's going to be a lot of excitement for Zaven Collins and Isaiah Simmons, those two young defenders, and the fact that they just took care of Kyler and brought in Hollywood Brown. It's a very tough division, certainly.
And it always is. And it's funny with Seattle, because I agree with you. I don't know what to expect. I mean, it used to be, if they had Russell Wilson, they would at least be competitive. Yeah. But now they have Drew Lock. However, I am going to, because I am a professional, transition this into another conversation that we haven't talked much about. And I believe on all 49ers podcasts, you are contractually obligated to say the name Jimmy Garoppolo at least 5 to 7 times. So they have Drew Lock, but there's the tiniest chance that their QB1 ends up being Jimmy Garoppolo. Feels like a long shot, though the storylines are spectacular. What do you think? I mean, that's not really where I think he goes. I think he ends up a Texan, but what do you think the odds are?
I tell you why I don't think he's going to be a Seahawk. It's similar to why I didn't think Baker would be a Seahawk, because Seattle wants Drew. They want Drew Lock to work out. At 25, they want to say, John Snyder wants to say, I saw something. I will say that they liked him when he came out of Missouri. Mm-hmm. And that was part of the reason he was ultimately traded. And they felt like he can be a starting quarterback. He flashed 2 years ago, and obviously last season was horrendous when he did play. I don't think
is a great word.
Yeah, I don't think Garoppolo is a Seahawk, though. I'm telling you, Seattle wants to make it work with Drew Lock, and they paid Geno Smith a little over $7 million a year in case things don't go well. So it's interesting you said the Texans, because Houston loves Davis Mills. It's not the worst idea to bring in Jimmy as a potential backup, but Houston loves Davis Mills. I'll tell you that.
Well, and it's interesting because it's so crazy to think that Jimmy Garoppolo, who they went to a Super Bowl a couple years ago, they went from 3-5 to the NFC Championship game. And I'm not saying that was all Jimmy. And I think there's many a person who would make the argument that it was in spite of Jimmy. I don't believe that, because I think that he was a very integral part of that team in a variety of ways. But it's so kind of crazy to think that he could end up in Houston as Davis Mills' backup. And that's not a knock on Davis Mills. It's just kind of crazy. But this offseason, a lot of things happened. There was the shoulder surgery. There was Russell Wilson going to the Broncos. There was Deshaun Watson. There was Matt Ryan. There's Carson Wentz. There were so many things that happened that we didn't necessarily predict. And I think the 49ers also did not necessarily predict that the market now as to where he could go is very limited. And for the Texans, he could come in and be a little bit for Davis Mills what he was last year for Trey Lance. That is a possibility. But I think for Garoppolo too, do you want to be a bridge quarterback the rest of his career? I don't, it's just kind of crazy to think of kind of where he was to where he is now, but that's the league.
Yeah, I really did. That's been a big surprise to me, but I don't know how they can. It was kind of like Cleveland with Mayfield, certainly not as bad, but I don't know how Garoppolo can be on the roster week one. I don't know how that makes sense for anyone.
It's not good for anyone, because you end up, I think it's, first of all, you could do 1 year of this Jimmy or Trey thing, and it was very clear that it was going to be Jimmy. So you can do 1 year of that. It's not good for Garoppolo. It's not good for the 49ers. It's not good for Lance. So you can't put Lance in a position where he has a bad game or two bad games, which may happen because he's essentially a rookie quarterback. And you have now all the fans and everyone calling for Jimmy Garoppolo, which is of course ridiculous based on what happened last year, but that everyone's calling for Jimmy. It's just bad for everyone. And I don't think it benefits anyone involved. So I just don't see how he could be on the roster. He certainly couldn't be on his salary, but I just don't think he could be. Yeah,
the way to look at that, if you're a Niners fan or any fan, if your team has a quarterback that's been rumored, for example, to be traded, it's all about how does it affect the future of the team in terms of what's the most valuable asset. In the Niners case, it's Trey Lance, and having Jimmy there this season doesn't help him. It doesn't help Trey Lance. If anything, it hurts him, and that's the bottom line. So for me, I just would be stunned if he was there week one. I don't see a situation where that happens.
I don't either. I think if he doesn't get traded, he will be released. That's my feeling on that. I just think that's probably going to happen. And you brought up a really good point, your most valuable asset. And it's not just about this season. It's about the future of the team. And I do think having Garoppolo on the roster this year becomes a detriment to the future of the team because it's a detriment to Lance. So it all comes full circle back to these quarterbacks. So you said an 11 or 12 win team, which I'm sure 49ers fans everywhere are rejoicing and jumping up and down for that one. I would agree with you. I think I'm going to go 11 wins, but I'm going to do something really annoying because we're recording this July 25th. It'll go live July 26th, which means the Super Bowl is like a gazillion years from now. But I am going to make you give me a prediction on who's in the Super Bowl and who wins. This is like a way too early prediction.
I think my preseason pick last year was Rams over Bills, which I felt really.
Okay.
This year, there's so much hype with Buffalo. I don't know if I can quite get there. And I'm really excited about Green Bay because of the defense. They've really loaded up on it. The AFC is such a monster. Man, that's tough. Right now in July 25th, I'm going to probably surprise people, but I'm going to go Green Bay over dogs.
The dogs are like, Green Bay, are you kidding?
Green Bay over Baltimore.
Green Bay over Baltimore. Boy, that actually feels like such an old school, amazing Super Bowl. And clearly my dogs are super excited about it. Big Green Bay and Baltimore fans here in the South.
Lamar Jackson, monster bounce back year. Can't wait to see Rashad Bateman. They're going to run the ball. I love Dobbins. I really like what they did in terms of Linderbaum in the draft at center, which is going to solve a lot of problems. And then Kyle Hamilton, who's a day one starter. The Ravens, to me, are one of my big sleepers.
Okay. I mean, I kind of love that Super Bowl. Sorry for Niners fans, but that just feels like football. And that feels like football in January.
Yeah.
I'm super into it. Okay. bringing it back to the 49ers, before I let you go, how far do you think they get?
I think San Francisco is a wild card divisional team.
Okay.
I don't think they get out of the divisional, because then you're asking if, to get to an NFC championship, you're asking Trey Lance to beat someone like Rodgers or Dak Prescott or whoever you want to pick in the NFC, a top tier quarterback. That's a massive ask for a guy who basically played 14 games at North Dakota State and then hasn't played in the NFL. But I do think he's going to surprise a lot of people. And I think within 2 to 3 years, this is a contending team. I just think he needs a couple of years to play it. But bottom line is, a playoff team, threat to win the NFC West, probably a wild card team, and then gets into the wild card divisional round.
And it would be amazing if the 49ers are once again in Dallas for the first round of the playoffs and then in Green Bay for the second round of the playoffs. That would be pretty incredible. A little deja vu all over again, but I would agree. I think asking Trey Lance to beat Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay might be difficult.
Losing your guy to Miami is, that affects Kyle as well. As much as I love Kyle, so yeah.
No, things are going to be very different. And the coaching staff, you bring up a great point. There were a lot of changes on the coaching staff. So that's going to take some time. As a Michigan person, I have to ask, because I was the most excited about this. What do you think? First of all, I was also very excited that you said Ambry Thomas is the most important, because go Blue.
I'm a fan, so I'm biased on him.
You love who? Sorry?
I've always liked Thomas. I'm biased on him. So
I love it. That's awesome. No, I actually think Ambry Thomas has the potential to be a star. I actually really do. And we'll say July 25th, 2022. You heard it here first on this podcast. But what do you think is Brian Griese coming in as Trey Lance's quarterbacks coach?
Great stuff. You went to UM. You're all about go Blue.
Oh, I'm all about go Blue.
That was a really good hire, and something that can't be overstated. I mean, quarterback coaches are the lifeblood of young quarterbacks. We saw it, for example, in Miami, in Buffalo with Josh Allen, and now obviously Kafka and Daniel Jones in New York, another one I really like. We mentioned Miami with Tua, but having a young quarterback coach or a really good quarterback coach or a really good innovative head coach can make a massive difference. So now for Trey, you have Brian and Kyle. That's a great 1-2 punch.
I have to agree. I think it's going to be awesome. Well, Jordan, I really appreciate you joining me today. Great stuff. Training camp starts. Well, when this comes out, training camp starts today. And I mean, it just feels like
it's
like football.
Very, very good. Very excited. It's officially like you can see week 1 right there. It's right in the.
You're getting that. I mean, in a month, the preseason's over. So if you put it in that perspective, we are just a little bit away. Well, thank you so much for joining me, you guys. We are brought to you by FIVO. We are brought to you by Bet Online. If you like what you heard, and I know you did, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. Follow us on Instagram at Fangirl Sports Network. And with that, I'll talk to everybody later this week with our first training camp update. Bye all.